It's pretty rare that I watch a movie that has a unique take on any of the old classic movie monsters.
Yeah.
Like zombies or like zombies or Frankenstein's or vampires. This one, I hadn't seen quite the idea that they did here before. I thought
Isolated vampire story.
yeah. Well, and also just the way the vampires operated in it. We're like, oh, this is different. Like not
They have like their own
incredibly different.
language and stuff. No.
Yeah,
It's,
well, the language, that was the thing that really was like, whoa, this is weird. Like that language is crazy.
It's not like Underworld where they have like crypts and like raves and stuff, you know?
Yeah, there's
Like,
no leather jerkins to be found
They're
anywhere.
just kind of, you get the feeling they're walking around in caves and stuff, but they still have suits. Some of them still wear suits.
Yeah, it wasn't totally clear to me like how much of that is like their previous existence or if they're
Right.
like because they definitely felt animal-like often.
Yes.
Like not human in the sense of not always sentient or in control of themselves. But then of course the language and the way that the leader of the gang operates in particular sort of is a counterpoint.
Like, do they have lawyers? Is my question.
Right.
Are there
do they have a
vampire lawyers? How do they
society?
settle disputes?
Right.
You know?
Well, yeah. Or is it just that guy just rips your face off with his long fingernails?
I think that's what it is. And we solved it here.
Yeah.
At Directorpiece
we got to the bottom of it.
Mhm.
I hope you enjoyed that. But Abe has done a wonderful job of telling you what show you're listening to, assuming
Yes.
that you haven't read it already, and that's Directorpiece Theater.
That's
I'm
true,
one
I
of
haven't
your
done
director hosts, Adam Ganzer, and with me is my esteemed filmmaking colleague.
Yeah, I'm Abe.
Yeah,
and
you are.
You're in my bosom today, dear listener.
Abe's bosom. The
My
legend has
bosom
foretold.
of words. A house built upon letters.
Mm.
Yeah, I wrote a thing, and I'm gonna
Yeah, you
read it to Adam.
Yeah, you are.
And you're gonna listen to it, or you can turn this off and do something else.
I just want you to know it's snug and cozy in here. You know?
It's gonna be pretty cool. I think.
Yeah, it's pretty cozy. And the film we're talking about today, this is the first time I'd seen it. It's called 30 Days of Night. It was made in 2007, and for those of you who are Hartnett-ophiles, this is going to be your jam. If you're a Josh Hartnett stan, welcome back to the fold. We got something tasty for you today.
Yeah,
right?
he's the pro tag.
I liked him in this.
Ben Foster shows up.
I liked him in this too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he had a weird affect, but he definitely believed it. Like the choices were weird, but he was definitely fully invested in it, and I was like, okay, good. You know,
he was like he you know what he felt like? He felt like an old Southern mage of some kind. You know, like
Right.
here I am
like
casting a spell on you.
yeah, I got an incantation for just such an occasion. He definitely felt like that.
His character wanted to become a vampire, and then he doesn't get his wish. Kind of
Right.
like Guillermo in What We Do in the Shadows. But his is more sad. He literally gets decapitated by his, I don't know, sire, the person he was hoping would sire him.
He wants to be a vampire, and he's kind of a thrall of sorts, right? Like
He's a thrall. Yeah, he's definitely a thrall.
Yeah.
And he's and he basically gets him into the town. He's like tells him about the town, and he's like, "Get in here. There's some good eating in here." Basic thrall shit.
I'm curious how this is not a real logical problem, but there were a couple of like previous circumstance questions I had about this movie, which I don't always have, but this one I did. And one of them is like, so that guy's not from this town, right?
No.
So he just did some Googling.
I think he came from that boat where the at the beginning of the movie he's looking at what seems to be like an oil rig or like something like an icebreaker, definitely. And I think it's stopped in the middle of the ice because I think the vampires took over the boat, and I think they've been going on boats for a while.
Like they've just been a seafaring
they've been
species for a while.
Pirates.
It definitely this is where like I think this is actually the murkiest plot point of the movie. The movie suggests, and I think it makes sense, that this guy kind of scouted this place out and brought the vampires to this area because in this part of Alaska where the story takes place, there is no sun for 30 days.
It's about to undergo a yearly phenomenon,
Right.
which is true in some parts, like I think the Shetland Islands.
Yeah, if you get north enough, right?
There's like places that people live that are north enough where it becomes dark for literally a whole month, and I think that's true in like northern parts of Alaska. Don't quote me on that. I'm just regurgitating things that I've heard.
It's a premise that's like, that's a clever idea. Of course, that is a place vampires would want to live.
But it's weird because the town closes down completely.
Mm-hmm.
No one, like, there's this unwritten law that says no one leaves, no one comes to town, there's no planes running. And I'm like, why is that?
Yeah, why is that?
Why is it cut off from the world so much? Like, I understand why they do it from a story standpoint, but like logically, just because the lights are off doesn't mean that planes can't go. You know, like that's not how planes work.
You know that when there's night, planes go to sleep.
I think,
you not know that?
but I mean, like, to play my own devil's advocate here, I think the idea is that no one wants to live there,
right,
and so a bunch of the infrastructure leaves.
Yeah, it's like the city of Vernon outside of L.A. You know that city?
No one wants to live there.
Exactly. Vernon is like a great spot
because it's like a town of industry,
right?
You know?
There's like 40,000 people there during the day, like doing various industrial jobs, and like 100 people live there. That's it.
Yeah, exactly.
Nobody lives there.
So they're like the stewards of this town, and includes the sheriff. You know, Josh Hartnett.
Yeah. He's the young sheriff, it seems like, and also the only real infrastructure in the town.
Right.
Kinda.
But
right.
Today, I actually don't want to talk about the plot.
No,
I don't
of course.
care.
Yeah.
It's not important. In fact, I'm not really going to talk about particular scenes that much.
Okay.
But what I do want to talk about is that we kind of set the stage, and thank you for doing that. Like, we kind of set the stage of exactly what makes this horror story click. And it's the idea of isolation. And then once the vampires attack and kind of take over the town, there's this essence of claustrophobia as well. Because they're stuck inside rooms, they can't make noise, they're trying to evade capture, essentially, and death. And that means that the director needs to be smart with his camera in order to get you to think about those things, and make you feel those things in a way that is not scripted.
Yeah, it's a bizarrely difficult task in some ways because, like, almost every horror movie ends up being this. I like to use Blake Snyder's genres because they're actually really helpful for people who are not filmmakers. The genre that's called monster in the house, and the mechanics of that genre are that there's a creature or a series of creatures or whatever that are, circling and investigating this little area, and our protagonists can't get out. They can't get out of the house.
Yeah, Alien.
Right, right.
Alien's a lot of films.
Yeah, Jurassic Park is actually one of those. So, in this case, the issue becomes, how do you make claustrophobia happen in an entire town? Like, they have an entire town's worth of space to work with, and they still want you to feel trapped there. So, how did the director do it?
And I chose a movie that isn't particularly memorable. I'm not trying to dunk on it. It's like run-of-the-mill vampire movie, more or less. It's got a good hook. It's based off a graphic novel. There's reasons why it was made. But I would say a lot of the reasons why you get in the seats for a vampire movie like this, its anticipated audience, is part of the action, part of the gore. And I feel like some of that suffers from that mid to late 2000s shaky camera approach to action sequences.
Yeah.
There's also, but the reason that I chose it is that there's a lot of good work by the director, David Slade, and the production designers as well, just in how the sets are designed themselves. And I would include costume in that conversation to invoke a kind of like oppressive frame.
Yeah.
You feel trapped in almost every scene, and there's a method, I think, to the madness. And this is like a part of my ongoing attempt to convince you through this podcast that even when we consider mediocre work, which I wouldn't call that, but I'm just saying, like, in mass, when you look at movies, There's actually fantastic work done by craftspeople in the industry, no matter the film. No job is too small, and I think these people prove that. So yeah,
I 100% concur with this. By the way, I mean, but well, that's the premise of the podcast, obviously. But like,
right.
I will say, I thought the camera work by the director stood out immediately in this film.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I really think this guy. I'm like, this guy is really good. And then I looked up his filmography, and I recognized several interesting titles. So we're like, oh shit, okay, this guy's done some stuff.
Yeah. Hard Candy was the
Hard
what
Candy.
put him
and
on my map.
And
that's a similar situation where it's like it all kind of takes place more or less in one room.
Yeah, he went on to make Bandersnatch.
Right, that was the Netflix Choose Your Own Adventure film.
Yes, so like he's, people believe in him, and I can see why. I can see why they do. Anyway, that's all I wanted to add to that. Carry on.
Yeah. So yeah, mostly you feel hopeless throughout the film, and ultimately some people survive. Spoilers for 30 seconds. Josh Hartnett and company survive the onslaught, but he dies in order to save the town. So the concept here at play that I think in order to make Stick the Landing is more or less that you need to feel this doom and gloom throughout. It needs to permeate. Despair needs to permeate every instance. And there's a way in which I think he did that. So you're a director, right? The premise basically begs for you to focus on two things based, like on the idea of an Alaskan town that's at night for a month. Isolation and claustrophobia come up in my head. No one is coming for you, and the threat has now boxed you in. So let's look at how the director frames things to make you feel that. And I'm going to start with camera lenses. Mm-hmm. So telephoto lenses, especially in dialogue
Here
scenes.
we go, baby. We love this shit on this podcast. We love it.
So dialogue scenes are always tough because you are yap, and cut in between the two of them. That's what a dialogue scene is for the most
talking
part.
Meat.
I mean, there's not a lot of compound shots in this. There's not a lot of compound action in this. It's not like a Spielberg film where it's like, let's go pan over to the watch and whoa, that means something. And oh, there's a bomb in the truck, No, this is just like, here, I'm talking at you. Oh, I heard you and now I'm speaking back at you.
There's also there's not a lot of complications or reveals in this plot either.
Nah, it's
pretty straightforward.
Once you kind of know what's going on, you kind of just want to sit in it.
It takes like 40 minutes to settle into what it is, really. Like it takes about 40 minutes to do the first act and then do the part of the movie that's the second act where they finally get, these are our band of survivors who are hunkered down now for the third day. Like that takes 40 to 50 minutes to get to that point.
Right.
But after that, it's basically a pretty static, how are we going to get out of this sort of type of movie?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you're shooting a movie. Wide lens or long lens?
Yep.
Here's what each do to the background. A longer lens, a telephoto lens, compresses the background. We've talked about this on this podcast. It's just true. That means as you get longer on the lens, meaning 50 millimeters, 70 millimeters, 80, 100, 150, 200, when you get higher up on the number, the face if you were to take a frame and imagine a face in the center of that frame, it occupies the same visual real estate than a wider lens. If you were to frame it that way, the background, you notice that the background on the telephoto lens would truncate the background. Basically, it would make it so that the patch, there would be less wall shown.
You're seeing less of it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just the narrow sections directly behind the head of the subject. A wide lens does the opposite. The background expands and you see more of the walls, landscape, or whatever. Pretty easy stuff. Additionally, longer lenses create a more narrow depth of field, whereas wider lenses allow for more things to be in focus. This isn't always true due to the nature of optics, but if you aren't really focused super close to the lens, it becomes more true. And what that has is basically, I'm just saying, a telephoto lens blurs backgrounds more often. So in this movie, we see most dialogue scenes on long lenses, and David Slade chooses them to blur the backgrounds and compress our field of view. People are literally locked in the frame, and it confines them. And he frames it in that way. He tries to short frame people, and he tries to like cut off a little bit of their hairline, a little bit narrow on the neck. It's a very kind of zoomed in movie because of that.
Yeah, there's a lot of extreme close-ups, which they're not always in vogue. A lot of movies that do telephoto lenses, though, also love to live in those like Western close-ups or those or profiles that are extreme close-ups.
They're more epic, right?
Yeah. You really get intimate with the character. Like if they feel very intense because there's only like a few people in your life that you get that close to. You get physically that close to, right? And it's like a lover or maybe a family member. But even that,
where you can see their pores and such.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's just one way of doing it, playing with the edges of frames and choosing the lens and to like warp essentially what inhabits that frame. Let's talk about color contrast, because this movie has a lot of it, especially in the wide shots. So I have this theory that this movie works in black and white. Like you could take color out of this equation and it still plays. It's just the way they shot it. And if you have read the graphic novel, this is how that graphic novel functions. It colors everything as very stark. There's not a lot of shading in the way traditionally it's done, where it's like many bands of lightness. It's basically all black, white, red. And there's a stylistic reason, I think, for that. It looks cool. Like Sin City came out in 2005, and stuff like that. But it has a sneaky reason in terms of making you feel like your subjects are oppressed in frame. Because they can't get out, and isolation and claustrophobia, which is what we're going for here, is basically you can do that with color. So the way that you do that is when you're shooting like full bodies, head to toe or wider, how do you make someone feel like they're locked in the shot? And how do you make it feel claustrophobic? Well, you surround your subjects with a single color that contrasts with them. So in this movie, most people are dressed darkly and their background is white snow, or they're dressed or lit brightly and their background is black night. It's a very binary kind of system. And by doing this, it has the effect of encasing them with negative space. So they're still boxed in, but by their background, not just by the confines of the lens.
That's smart.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, the director's essentially making a wall of a monotone color that the subject lives inside of, like a little prison.
Right, exactly.
It's cool.
And that's pretty simple stuff.
Yeah.
But additionally, when it's necessary, as it is with like the initial sequences with the vampires, blending your antagonist into the background serves a great purpose. Notice how often in the beginning of the film, when we get those quick shots of like what we learn will become the vampires, they're like caked with snow. So not only does this kind of juxtapose with the strategy that you're using with your protagonists who are locked into their frames, choosing colors or hues or lightness that makes them similar to their background, blends them into their environment. So they become their environment. And this makes the negative space of the earlier shots more terrifying, because if they come from the white, well, now you're surrounded by white, or vice versa. They can kind of come out of anywhere, which kind of goes back to what you were saying about like Monster in the House.
Yep.
It is the environment. The alien can come out of the ceiling, the walls, beneath you. It's its domain. It's not your domain.
And they use that to varying effects in this movie. Like one thing that happens all the time is the vampires come from any direction. But another thing that they're using it to do is disguise how many vampires there are in any given scene.
True.
It's like, are they all here? Which ones are here? Like, how many are here? And because of this feature, there's always possibly more vampires to be seen somewhere.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So let's kind of talk more about a little bit more about how you use frame in terms of depth. I'm not necessarily talking about the lens itself this time. I'm literally talking about like stuff you put into frame. So this is probably more obvious, and it's especially like, I mean, I don't know about you, Adam, but I don't know how many like film school projects you saw that used like tactics like this, because like prisons are easy to do, But sometimes like people just like, wow, they're like imprisoned by the frames because they like there's bars there.
We were literally shown. So like, there's a really famous piece of American Beauty where Lester is like at his job. For somebody's seen it at his job. He works at a call center basically, and we're watching him have this phone call where he's bullshitting some guy. And we're watching his reflection in a computer screen.
That's right.
And the computer screen is like formatted to be literal bars. Like it's the kind of thing like that computer screen makes no sense. But you don't think about it because you're watching him, and the bars are clearly there to say he is in prison. And they showed us that like at least 2 different classes because they're like, you see, suggestion in the frame, right?
Right.
So yeah, they love that shit in film school. Absolutely.
And it's for a purpose, you know. It's we're kind of laughing at its overuse, but that doesn't mean that like there's a reason shit is cliche, right? Why? Because once upon a time it really worked. Well, and it was it's maybe obvious to us now. It wasn't so obvious back then.
And I would say like honestly, man, and I mean this is the thing I dialogue with my students about all the time. Like I don't think people left the theater remembering that they saw that.
No. They don't care.
Like, and I don't think they actually see it. Like, I think it scans on a more primal way, and they don't...
Yeah.
Like, so they're as obvious as it looks to a filmmaker, a general audience doesn't see that stupid computer code. You know what I mean? True. Like, so, like, we can get away with a lot of shit, man. We get away with a lot of shit.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. I was just like kind of as people ingest more and more, like people who live on the earth right now have ingested more media than like most people who are dead.
Oh yeah, like, absolutely. Yeah.
So I think the shared kind of lexicon and film comprehension skills of our average, moviegoer is probably a little higher than it's ever been. But what you're saying is absolutely true. There's a primal kind of reaction to this stuff. And that's kind of what he's doing here, is that, especially when you're shooting with a telephoto lens, where there's a lot of foreground and background that can be out of focus, placing obstructions like a chain link fence or pipes or signs or anything that's like bulky that kind of obstructs the field of view, is ways to separate quadrants of the frame. So basically you can encase or imprison your protagonist like, American Beauty by literally placing stuff. And that's what we notice about town. And we also notice it inside their buildings as well. Not only do they barricade stuff and we kind of shoot from the hip in that way, outside there's just cars and, it's a town. So there's a lot of stuff, and they kind of do a fly on the wall kind of thing. Which was like very in vogue at the time, 2007, where there's a lot of like handy, like documentary fly on a wall kind of stuff going on. They embraced that and made it so that you kind of feel like, the camera is a vampire right now or something like that. Like, even though it's not, you get that vibe.
Yeah.
So it does that. And on top of that, in terms of literally the frame, you are actually, creating boxes, and you can do stuff like imprison your protagonists.
You actually put your finger on something really interesting there that I don't think I've heard somebody actually say for maybe ever, but certainly not for a while. Like, yeah, we were really obsessed with those like long lenses, compressed space things that suggested a point of view.
Yeah.
And a lot of media from the time said there was a point of view to it, like The Office or something, right? Or like Cloverfield, right? True. But most movies that were creating the sense of point of view wanted the feeling of it, and relied on you being aware of that trope and sort of like feeling that trope. Mm-hmm. Like that was like part of the language of the time, is like, there's a documentarian here seeing this, and you don't believe there might actually be somebody there, but that's what this is, and that language.
Yeah, it's funny actually. It's almost weird to see stuff that is still persistent from that era. I literally, because we were talking about vampires in this podcast, right. I made a reference to what we do in the shadows, mm-hmm. which is I think on FX or whatever right now, the TV show, which is based on a movie that was made a decade ago at this point. And it's like, okay, it's weird to see kind of like that Office-esque, like they will nod to it because they do it in the movie. Yep. Sometimes the vampires eat the cameraman, and stuff like that, which was a joke that was like already old hat in 2010,
right? Right.
So it's just weird to be like 10 years into the future where that's no longer really a trope, but they're still doing that joke because it's still a funny joke.
Now it's almost a genre.
Yeah, it's almost.
You know what I mean?
It's absolutely.
It's almost a genre. Yeah, like here it was still kind of a contemporary style thing, but. I don't mean to derail you too much. That was just an interesting observation.
Yeah, we won't dig into it, but that's absolutely how genre, in my opinion, that's how genre forms.
Yeah, how they happen.
They just, people point out things that look, that looks like that. That looks like that enough times. Let's give it a name.
That and also there's a particular corral of feelings that have been created successfully several times. And we remember them enough that now we're looking for those feelings explicitly.
Yeah. Like a Strand type movie.
Oh God, dude, make your next fucking point. Just make it.
So sequences that are shot in this movie with wide angle close-ups. There's quite a few. And there's one I'll pick apart, which is, or not really, but like one I'll point out that if you do go back and watch this movie, look at this scene. There's a scene where Josh Hartnett and Ben Foster's the stranger who arrives and he's immediately put in a police cell. There's 2 times they have a kind of a discussion. And the second time they have a discussion, the stakes are higher because Josh Hartnett's friend has died. Or he doesn't know where he is, but there's blood everywhere. So I was just talking about how the director, as a convention, was using telephoto lenses, right?
Right.
So the director here actually in this sequence uses wide angle lenses, but he uses it only for extreme close-ups. And this actually still does the job by combining both of the principles I've mentioned. So if you remember the thing I was talking about with color contrast, the walls of the police station are more or less white or like an off-white. Mm-hmm. So when you do use a wide angle lens on a close-up, as I mentioned, the wide angle lens expanding the background, what he's doing is he's also making his background uniform. So you minimize the background expansion of the wide angle lens. So basically Slade is nerfing that aspect of the lens. He's basically saying because you don't feel the wide angle in the background because it's all one color. You don't feel the size or scale of what's behind them because it's one color, it's one wall, it's an out of focus white wall.
So it's literally just the size of the subject and how warped they are or aren't.
That's really all he's getting from the wide angle lens, and he's minimizing the thing that he doesn't want out of the wide angle lens, which is expansive background.
Yeah.
And what does that earn him, I guess, is another question that's up to, you'd have to ask him. But my thought is that wide angle lenses do often warp and even fisheye, maybe not in this movie, but it definitely distorts the contours of an actor's face. And this gives you kind of an otherworldly vibe. Like I think the director is using that. Yeah, using that aspect of the lens to kind of create a sickly horror vibe. And so... But remember, when he's using that wide angle lens, he's muting the aspects of the lens he doesn't want through production design and set deck. So
it's really clever because that's a director who understands all we've been doing since we were tiny little children is scanning faces to learn emotions and learn what we know, what a person thinks and feels. That's if all of us are an expert in one thing, it's scanning the human face. That's the first thing and the last thing we're all doing, right? So using the lens this way is in effect giving us a misscan or a weird scan, you know what I mean?
A kind of uncanny valley aspect of the face.
Right. And he's using it in a way where we feel we feel in an unconscious way because none of us are doing this consciously. That person's not right. Something's wrong with that person. They feel off somehow. And
then you blacken his teeth.
Yeah,
and then make him talk like an old Southern mage, and you bada bing.
But he doesn't the teeth are really obvious, but otherwise he doesn't feel particularly manipulated. As in he does not like the vampires do, where it's look at those contacts and those teeth and stuff. He doesn't feel like the image is particularly manipulated. He feels like he's in the same world as everybody else. But the lens width really could be a dramatically different choice if he wasn't mitigating the background. It's smart. I've never thought about doing that, but now I'm going to.
Now you're gonna do
now
it.
I'm gonna do it. Yeah, I'm gonna steal that.
Let's talk about just real quickly, because we kind of touched upon it a little earlier, but I want to jump to not camera anymore, but I want to talk about editing for a second.
Sure.
Which is just that this movie does something that a lot of horror movie monsters do. Where they abstracts the monsters for Act 1 and parts of Act 2 mostly, because it does this thing that a lot of horror movies do, which is not show you the full monster for as long as possible. So editing, and usually reliance on, in those sequences where you're editing quickly, insert shots, meaning shots of hands, shots of footprints, shots of, like bisecting the monster into just like their legs and not showing the whole shot, doing these inserts, that represents the horror. And what you're doing there is you're not getting a clear geography of the monster, but just showing the world around the victims and showing the world around like what the monsters are doing. And you create a sense of anticipation and expectation that the monsters are part of the environment, kind of that monster in the house thing that we're talking about.
Yep.
So if they are masters of it, and we can't get a quick glimpse of them, what it's essentially doing is it's making another way in which the sequences and which the protagonists are, having these scenes where they're just like talking things out. They feel like there's a juxtaposition between the two of them. It's almost like the monsters operate in a different speed and a different time. Another way in which they are, like, in a way, imprisoning the protagonists. They're once again in control of literally the editing.
He also, he's definitely speed ramping, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Like some of those grabs, like those off-camera grabs where the monsters grabbing people, and they're incredible. Like, they're really well done. I thought.
Yeah, and the sound design helps that too.
Yeah, some of the best I've seen in a movie, quite honestly, and because that's a trope you see a lot.
Right. Yeah.
It's done really well here.
Right. Yeah, I think the thing moves. Those sequences are probably the best in the film, just in terms of like what this film's like legacy is. Is that the times in which you haven't really seen the monsters yet, and the town is just getting picked off one by one.
Yeah, there's that one weird scene where these two guys are with this woman, and they're like, all right, which one you going home with? And she's like, why do I have to pick? And it's like, what's happening up in Alaska, bro?
They're fucking threesomes, dude.
Yeah, like, okay. And they're like deciding which house to go back to. So that's like just a funny introduction to these characters,
and they're like miners, too. Yeah, that's the best part. They're like, another day in the mines. So you guys want to fuck each other until we have to do this again? Yeah.
Let's pick a place.
And they're all like hot. They're all like super hot miners, because I guess I don't know. I guess you could be hot.
Yeah.
Hot miners. You're swinging that pickaxe all day. Yeah, for sure. Anybody can be hot, man.
Anybody can be hot.
It's all just how you carry yourself, man. But it's funny that, in movies that often, like any profession, is instantly everyone's just a 10. Like
that's right.
Just dial it up to maximum hot right now.
It was very funny, like that deserves its own podcast. Just like what's going on with those.
What's going on with these Alaskan miners, man?
100%. So, but like that's also one of my favorite examples of how the vampires are deployed, because the speed with which like one of them gets yanked out of there, and like knifed in the neck and stuff. It's like, whoa!
It's like Velociraptors,
really shocks you,
man.
Yeah. That's exactly what it felt like. It felt like the Velociraptors. Yeah. And good comp.
Yeah, and Spielberg's doing all this shit because of 30 Days of Night, A
little guy named Stevie Spielberg watched this film, and he learned
like,
something from it.
I'm gonna go back in time and make Jurassic Park.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about. Let's go back to camera. Actually, let's talk about angles. Huh?
Sure.
Let's get excited about angles.
I'm ready. I'm ready for it.
Yeah, so let's talk about low angles, specifically indoors. So when you're outside, often you won't feel low angle unless you're grounded with things like trees or mountains or literally the ground. You don't get the feeling of a low angle just with a subject. I'm going to kind of try my best to tell you what I mean by that.
Okay.
Obviously, their feet appear larger than their head when you have like an extreme low angle. So imagine that in your head if you would.
Right.
But
like they're at a vanishing point above their head.
Right. But that's not that's not enough. When you're a director, you want to make things drastic. You want to make these things have indicators in the frame that say the thing that you wish to be saying. So it may seem obvious, but something like a low ceiling really helps that effect when you film indoors. Because what you've done is if you're looking up at a lower ceiling, you've really emphasized the encasing the protagonist. And you've done it in the movie before with left and right, their walls and whatnot. Now you're doing the same thing with their headroom. You're basically doing the same thing, but now from above. There's no way out. Literally now I've closed the left, the right, I've encased them in depth, what's toward the lens, what's behind them in lens. And now he's literally doing it with up and down. So there's no way out. He's chosen to dominate all of the aspects of like where you can move a frame. And he's basically said to you, there is a limitation to the system. That is how he's encased you. And you didn't even know it because you weren't thinking about ceilings. Right. And so let's look at the sequence when they're locked in the house in Act 2. So there's this point in the movie where they basically set up in an attic. And the director has placed like an awkward angled ceiling that's lower than most rooms. And he uses this. He puts the camera at a low angle and looks up, and he kind of cants or Dutches his angles, which just is another way of saying kind of tilts it to one side or another to emphasize that space, because that space was designed or chosen for a specific reason. It's the lines in the ceiling and the lines in the walls. It's these wooden walls that have deep cuts between the wood. And so he frames them with those lines. And so on top of what we use so far, using a telephoto lens and compressing the space, you've basically made a prison of lines all around your subject, or basically shown there's a barrier between where they are and where everything else is. And I think there's a psychology to this, by the way. If you go back to your middle school art class that we all took, and you drew your first vanishing point off to the horizon, if you remember, the art professor was like, the reason this works is diagonal lines. When you emphasize them in your frame, you emphasized a closed system. Your horizon now has a set distance. Those diagonal lines spark in our monkey brain the idea of either close or far. So that's what I mean by indicators. In this case, expanse or confinement, claustrophobia, or isolation can be the same thing. It's leading to a wall. It makes you focus on the wall. When you're in a confined space where we recognize that there's the pattern on a wall or a seam leading up to a ceiling, it shows you that the confines of the room are more clear to you and emphasized in frame. So by showing that geography, you can make it so that we're like literally locked into a set size. And that's why he's doing lines here. You can look at my video on Die Hard on the Small Beans channel. I talk about this. Things. Yeah. All pictures in the world that attempt to use space in a non-flat way use lines. Interesting shots use lines. Lines make things feel more flat or less flat. It's how you show space because it's how our brains identify distance.
Yeah. One of the best directors at that particular aspect is Wes Anderson. He loves using lines and vanishing points to create comedy.
Yes.
Like he does that shit all the time. All the time.
And there's a reason why he pans cameras the way he does, because they emphasize the left to right orientation of his movies.
Yep, absolutely.
Or right to left, left to right.
The most recent one, The French Dispatch, he got real zany about it. But in a way that I thought, like, for somebody who wants to see this, see this concept really clearly elucidated with a variety of ideas about how it could be done. That movie is one of the best for it, I think.
Yeah, I think he's a master of that very specific thing. It's actually, as he's gone through time, he's gotten more developed on that. to a point that if I was him, at a certain point, I would like look at a horizontal line or a vertical line, and I'd be like, fuck it.
Yeah, that's it. I've had it. Scrap them all. I only want diagonals and squigglies.
Loses his mind for no reason one day on set, and he's like, give me a diagonal line. My kingdom for a diagonal line.
I mean, yeah, he does seem... I mean, again, this is not a podcast about Wes Anderson, but like, it does feel like a lot of directors have a really clear idea that they're constantly chasing, and he's one of those. Like Terrence Malick's one of these directors too, and you do kind of feel like, especially for him, when he's had such control, like he's had so much control over his films, like artistically for such a long time, that he's been able to like perfectly achieve it. You wonder why he doesn't try a different aesthetic. It doesn't even try
his aesthetic, baby. He owns it. That's why.
Like, just it's branding. It's hashtag branding.
I mean,
that's what it is.
It's also what you're good at too. I mean, like maybe he could do a film. Like he has made films that have diagonal lines, so it's not like he can't.
It's not like he can't.
But it wouldn't feel like a Wes Anderson movie, and I think he understands.
He really wants that. Yeah.
And also, it would be weird if he didn't. Like, if he came out with a movie that just looked like a normal other movie, people would joke about that, right? They would be like,
you say that, and yet, like, Sam Raimi, who I think has a fairly distinguishable style, not to the degree that Wes Anderson does, made A Simple Plan.
That's true.
And it was great,
That's true.
So, like, I mean, I don't want to get too off on a tangent, but I think you're right that it's strange that he feels so committed to, like, my style is always the same. Like, I think that kind of thing happens more accidentally with filmmakers like Kubrick, or Terrence Malick. Like they accidentally, and I use that word very gently, like are constantly sort of going back to style tropes because it's how their brain works, and that doesn't seem like what's happening with Wes Anderson. But
no,
I could be wrong. We'll talk about that someday.
Because it's like over, yeah. And if you do want to hear an Wes Anderson podcast,
right. You guys talk about it all the time right.
On this channel, the Anders Sons, where we talk about the films of Paul Thomas Anderson and Wes Anderson. I mean, for no reason other than they share a last name. Anyway,
great bucket.
Let's talk about distance, because I was just talking about lines, and let's talk about lighting and staging. So these are elements that the director can influence with just moving bodies in space and lighting them. So you talk to any director of photography,
if they'll let you,
let you, because they're
gorgeous,
they're rock stars
and cool.
Yeah, they're cool.
Yeah.
But if you talk to them long enough and ask them about like what are like things to do. If you want to be a director of photography,
God, please do this. Please go up to
that's literally film
what's
school,
thing
right?
To do?
Hey, director of photography, what do I do to be you? Okay,
they
so
just
here we
toss
go.
you their sunglasses first.
They say, yeah, exactly, and just start. They say like, do you know how to play guitar?
Yeah. Do you roll cigarettes? Start rolling the cigarettes.
You're not a director of photography. So you'll probably hear something along the lines of when you talk to them that that the more distance between your subject and the background is always preferable. Let me say that again.
Yeah.
Putting more distance between your subject and their background, and I would argue and the subject and the camera, so everything on the terms of depth, is always preferable. This is because you can separate the lights themselves and isolate the lighting between the subject and the background. Makes sense.
Yeah.
What also makes sense that if you're trying to film a sequence where like claustrophobic shots matter, you'd use small spaces, right?
Right. I mean, it's easier.
So, it's not easier to do that. It makes it more claustrophobic for reasons that I said before.
That's what I mean. It's like easier to achieve that.
Oh, yes. So,
what I mean.
What I'm saying is these are two antithetical principles of filmmaking now.
Right.
Most movies get around this with a balance. They use camera lenses and angles that kind of manipulate the space so that they actually get more space or less space than it looks like. But you can't always do this, especially if you have like walls that are close, right? In fact, in a movie like this, where if we aren't in a small space, we are often in an expansive outdoor space. You may have the freedom of isolating the subject and background because you can literally move the lamps discriminately. but you still have the problem of the expansive background, right?
Mm-hmm.
So use the above strategies to downplay this. And one of the ways you can also do this is with lighting. Just don't light that stuff in the background.
Right.
But ultimately, wide spaces, you light space. And in narrow spaces, you light faces. And this is another great example of this this principle is in that same scene in the attic, where they're all just kind of going through like, what are we going to do? Should we make a run for it kind of stuff? All of that stuff is now in a small space. So in most cases, if you are in a smaller space and don't have the freedom that an expansive outdoor section would allow you, you'd use smaller, more directional light sources for these close shots. And this movie does a good job of doing that. They stage actors near windows as a light source, or they darken one side of their face and place a small lamp on the wall behind them to give a contrast between the two, like dark face, bright wall.
Mm-hmm.
There's lighting techniques as complex as like small directional lamps on gimbals that move and are like have very exacting laser beam kind of ways to light things. And there's techniques as simple as just covering a lamp with some black wrap, so it's basically just a spotlight. You can tell that this movie does a lot of that kind of stuff because especially in the indoor sequences where they're having to light these small spaces, they're using very directional light from very specific spots. And they like to show you where that light is coming from, because most directors of photography don't want to invent lights. They usually want to say like, oh, there's a source and that's how this scene is lit, because they want it to reflect reality. They don't want it to feel like a theatrical, like a play, where it's just like, what's that light? Oh, I don't know. What's that light? I don't know where that's
right.
coming from. Some directors of photography do that. I think I mentioned on another podcast, Vittorio Storaro, or Vittorio Storaro.
Very theatrical. Yes.
Very like orchestral. And so like he had a mix board that he would use, and you would like bring up the lights over here, kind of like what you do on a theater, like if you ran tech on a play in high school or whatnot. Because your lighting board would now be like an instrument. And that's how he used it. And he's on that side of the spectrum. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you have someone like Roger Deakins, who's like, everything is going to be natural light. There's nothing that's not natural light. Why? Because that's just my bag, baby. So
I'm the Deeks. And he throws you his sunglasses.
And then he throws you his sunglasses and plays guitar as he skateboards away.
They sparkle in the sun as they come.
Right. So I just wanted to point that out. That if you sometimes when you're watching a movie and you notice that like the space is small, take a look at the lighting and how the lighting is done. Most DPs these days actually still use big, soft light sources because that's very in vogue right now. In fact, like the decade spanning 2015 to probably 2025 and beyond, who knows how long it will last. Right now, we're in the thick of a very bright, soft source kind of lighting concept.
And I like it. I like this little era we're having.
It's very pretty.
Yeah.
It's pretty light.
Yeah.
But pretty light that bounces around and is diffused means it bounces everywhere.
Right.
And it means that you get less contrast overall. This movie does not do that.
That's right.
And there's a reason for that. And I think it's to make him feel more claustrophobic, or that's my argument. Let's talk about my last thing. Actually, that's all I really have in terms of like what he's doing. So basically, to sum up, this movie, which I said is not very great overall. I mean, I think personally it suffers from lack of charismatic character development and like a unique villain.
But just dropping bombs as you go here.
I don't give a fuck anymore, man. Either way, it exhibits a film vernacular that is fairly complex. They did a great job, in my opinion. And they did the following things that I listed. If you just want the table of contents of what I said.
Here I go. Number one.
Well, no, honestly, because I think when you hear him like a barrage, like you'll kind of see that there is a method to the madness more. Shoot close and telephoto. If you have to shoot wide, use color contrast to your favor. Contrast envelops your subject with the environment, and using affinity of color renders them kind of inert. Obstruct your view when relevant to encase your subject. Use editing and insert shots to make abstract elements of your story not reveal geography. When you're indoors, use angles that pronounce lines. Make those lines intersect. Light smaller spaces with confined sources. Pinpoint your focus to subject and background. Simplify, simplify, simplify. So that's like, if I had to tell someone that, hey, I'm making a claustrophobic movie, I would be like, these are some tactics you could employ. All this shit went into the making of a vampire movie, and you can see it. It's there for everyone to see in the frames. Pretty neat.
Yeah. I mean, I think that this was a well-crafted movie visually. Like, by and large. I didn't love the 2000s shutter speed action stuff. And which is weird because he was doing a great job before that. Like, that stuff felt like a sort of a nod to the aesthetic of the time, and it was like, I kind of feel like you were doing better stuff than that.
Or it doesn't feel like it's indicative of the time. It's like, oh, so yeah, I forgot there's that time that everyone saw Gladiator.
Shit. Yeah, right.
And so we use shutter speed, like stuff like that.
That's right, Gladiator. That's who started that.
Yeah.
It works in that movie, though. It doesn't bother me as much.
Because it's fucking... Because look who's directing it, motherfucker.
Right.
Look, he's good everywhere.
Right.
He's fucking great at it.
Apparently, like, I mean, I know this is a little off topic, but like, apparently Ridley Scott like doesn't storyboard that much, but he'll do storyboards on the day to like communicate angles, and the storyboards are like fucking incrediable. Like they're just like little hand drawings that he does, and they're incredible. Like I've been watching behind the scenes stuff on Black Hawk Down, not recently, but I did that a while ago. And they were all a bunch of people from different points of view kept mentioning that he was doing that. Like, yeah, so he'd like drop a quick sketch, and the sketch was like, "Holy shit, really?" You know what I mean?
That kind of makes sense. Yeah. That kind of makes sense to me because a little birdie once told, I don't know why, one of the steady cam ops that we would use when we were at Cracked, one of them worked on a Ridley Scott film.
Oh, that's cool.
At the time, and was like, you know what? He was like, my biggest takeaway from that set, because he's like, I've seen big sets. I was on like Hard 8, or not Hard 8. Sorry, Hard 8. What's the Tarantino? That's the Tarantino Western.
Hateful Eight. Yeah.
That's it. He was like, I worked on a lot of big sets and stuff, but the Ridley Scott one, the camera package was enormous. I think he's allowed to do what you said because he's specifically like, we have all the tools.
So I can think of whatever I want. Right.
So he spends a lot of his money on the toolkit. And that's, if you have money, great.
I mean, that's interesting, particularly because he comes from a production design background. So, right. So you'd think that he would be more narrow in his focus. Because for production design, that's a little bit of a nightmare, right?
Yeah,
you know what I mean. Right. Like you don't want camera.
Bring all the pieces.
Yeah, you don't want camera to be able to do anything because if you're a production designer, you've designed the space to be seen from certain angles and super not from others.
I think, but it's more of a testament for Ridley Scott. He knows what he can.
Yeah, he knows what he can do. Right, of course, he knows. Yeah,
but it seems like he wants all the tools there because at any random time, because you're like saying he's like firing from the hip a little bit.
Yeah,
he's like, oh shit, there's a little bug on the. You see this wheat over here? I'm gonna get a shot of this wheat, man.
Let's get this wheat. Shutter speed. Let me draw it for you, and it's like you fucking hear the heavens open up and sing while he draws it. Yeah. After you've Blade Runnered, I feel like at that point you can do whatever you want, man. Like once you've been a Blade boy, you can just do it forever.
Got all these blades. I don't know.
These blades. I gotta shoot these blades.
Gotta shoot these blades, and then I gotta run away. All right. This is not a bit. I just think it's really funny to do that voice for Ridley Scott, famous British director.
Yeah.
All right. So. That's it. That's all I got.
I guess that's all we got then. It's been a true pleasure and an honor. Thank you for your wonderful theory, and those of you who enjoyed this podcast. Hey man, thanks so much for being patrons. and for checking out Small Beans. I bet you might find other podcasts on this network that you could enjoy, like our Escape from the Multicurse podcast, in which we talk about the relevance of the multicurse in today's pop culture and media. There's all kinds of video projects and various podcasting couplets that you can explore, and maybe you might even want to get involved in the indie movie scene, because our boys Abe and Mike are making a little film called Papa Bear that you can check out and read the script and toss them a buck or two, and one day get nodded at by a famous director who will throw you his sunglasses. That's you. You have to buy a lot of sunglasses, Abe.
This is me skateboarding away.
Yeah.
This has been a Small Beans endeavor. We're a bunch of pals who make podcasts, sketches, music, web series, and movies. The Beans always have new ideas percolating, so make sure to check us out at patreon.com/smallbeans. That's patreon.com/smallbeans, where you can browse all of our current and past content, see what we've got planned in the future, and learn how your support can help the small beans grow into huge, giant monster beans. If you enjoyed this content module, please like, rate, subscribe, or tell a friend about us. We love you.